Hello, everyone. Brent Johnstone and I are honored to support the VCU School of Education as part of the Ruth Harris Professorship today to talk to you about dyslexia. We are very grateful to Dr. Lisa Cipolletti for extending us the opportunity to present to you today. And Brent and I wanted to be able for you to be able to see our faces and say hello to you before we start the presentation. Because we are apparently 90, we could not figure out how to record our faces without interrupting the slides. So we just wanted to say hello so you could see us in person.
What's up, Richmond?
So this is Brent Johnstone, the co-founder of Fathers Read 365, an incredible organization in Philadelphia that supports the literacy needs of over 180 early care providers. Brent also has decades of experience in education and counseling for children who are at risk. So Brent did not find out that he is dyslexic until college. He and I met at a literacy event in Temple University in 2019.
Today, I have the pleasure of introducing you to Dr. Heather Fleming. She is a national literacy advocate who has her doctorate in reading science. She is certified structured literacy and dyslexia specialist. Heather has a 19-year-old son with dyslexia that she started to fight for years ago, which brought her into the dyslexia world.
So we have found that it's very powerful when people can experience just a little bit of what it is like to have dyslexia. So we are going to do a mini simulation. If you would like to participate, you can pause this recording and get something to write with on a piece of paper. So what I'd like you to do is put your pen or pencil in the hand you don't normally write with. So if you're right-handed, put it in your left hand and vice versa. Now try to take notes on the next sentence. Ready? People typically associate dyslexia with difficulty reading, but it also impacts things like handwriting and spelling. How did that make you feel? Did it feel overwhelming? Can you imagine if you had to study from those notes or turn them in? Every day we ask kids to write down their homework in their journals or write instructions or take notes to study from. Brent, I know you have something to add here.
One, I would like to say, if you didn't take a moment, please go back, pause it, and try the simulation. You will get the best out of this training today, out of this presentation today, if you try the simulation. And when you try the simulation, I want you to really picture that being every day, every time you write, every time you need to take a note. So often when I was in school, when it was hey, take 2 minutes and turn this in, think about what you're going to write it down, then turn it in. After a while, I just started turning in work because I stopped. It would take me so long just to write the words down off the board. People would start handing in their work. And I didn't want to feel like I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what I was doing, but I didn't also want to feel like I didn't know what I was doing. So I just started turning in work. Whatever I would write down, I'll be one of the first, second, third people turning it in because everyone else would think that I knew what I was doing. Topics for today are going to be our why. Heather and I will discuss our why. We will also go over several dyslexia facts. We'll also point out how all children learn to read and write. We will help with identifying dyslexia. Also, how to advocate for your child or student that you may be teaching who has dyslexia.
So my son had trouble learning to read. And when I expressed concerns in kindergarten, the school first told us, don't worry, boys learn later than girls. In first grade, we were told not to worry, that they would catch him up and that reading was magical and that one day it would just blossom. By second grade, they began blaming him and us. They asked us in a fairly shaming way if we read to him, if he actually did the reading practice that they sent home. By third grade, they were saying, he just needs to try harder and focus more. And I remember one specific conversation where they said to my husband and me, don't put so much pressure on him. No, not all kids are good at all subjects. And the way the school reacted to our concerns, made us feel like we were being crazy for thinking there was something wrong and made my son feel incredibly ashamed because he thought it was his fault. The one thing I want to share as well is that he was interviewed on Science of Reading, the podcast by Susan Lambert a few years ago. And at the end of the interview, she asked him what the one thing was that he wished that teachers took away from it. And he said, just give us the opportunity to be great and we will not disappoint you.
Yes, I always love hearing that quote by your son, Heather. When I speak to my why, it's very personal. It speaks to the three gentlemen you see on your screen: my father, myself, and my son. Literally the last conversation my dad had with me, he said to me as I was sitting there crying, he said, "Boy, don't you ever," he actually said Raul, that's my family nickname. "Raul, don't you ever stop speaking about dyslexia." He says, "Because of you, I finally learned what I was living with all my life." And I was in shock. I didn't say anything. I just sat there crying. My dad was 73, and he lived for 69 years of his life trying to figure out what was going on. He had only heard me speak the last 4 years of his life about my dyslexia, because I was discovered in college. That just hurt me. That just hurt me. I never wanted someone to live their whole life with it. So fast forward to a few years, their whole life with it and not know what they were living with. Because I lived that way for 20 something years. And then my son, fast forward to my son, who was never diagnosed with dyslexia. But when we thought it was an issue and brought it through his great second grade teachers, they also thought it was an issue. And the baseline tests and everything they did showed that Mason was really struggling and he wasn't on level in school with his reading. And I remember crying like a baby that night because I was like, wow, my baby is going to go through what I live with. And I also remember in that moment thinking, no, he's not. No, he is not. Because I know people. I have more knowledge than my parents had about dyslexia. I know Diane Riot over at the International Dyslexia Association at the time. She was head of PA branch. And she set me down and she said, this is going to be a journey. And she showed me what I needed to do. Fast forward, ended up suing the school, being in litigation. One thing that came out of that, my son received Wilson tutoring for free twice a month, 30 minutes a day. Mason went from a kid in third grade reading on a kindergarten reading level to fifth grade. He tested out as one of the top three readers in his classroom. And when I tell you, I cried like a baby when I went in that car and I talked to my dad and I said, we did it. He won't live the way we live. He won't go through what we went through because now we know how to help our children who live with dyslexia, and now he knows how to help his child if he or she ever lives with dyslexia.
Right. And there's no need for it to get to third grade, number one. And the fact that you had to, take the school district to court, I mean, it's unnecessary because, again, to your point, we know how to identify this and we know how to teach kids how to read.
And
So I
no
think
need for
everyone, mhm.
I was going
Yeah,
to
go
say
ahead.
no
Sorry.
need for third grade, but it's definitely no need for 69 years and 20 something years for sure.
Correct. Correct. So I think everyone's familiar with the consequences of, not having been taught to read properly. So the increased rates of unemployment and incarceration and substance abuse, anxiety and depression and suicide. And this isn't theoretical. I lost a cousin to suicide. I've had friends who've lost children who were not identified as dyslexic to suicide because they were so ashamed, and understood that they didn't get something that other people got and they were being blamed for it. Brent?
And the one that really always hits me because of my work in the inner city for so many years, over 20 years, is the research suggests that about 50% of inmates show signs of dyslexia. And I think about so many young boys that I work with who were sweet young men. I mean, really nice people to get to know. But some of those guys couldn't spell their names. They couldn't spell the streets they lived on. They couldn't spell their birth dates, birthday months. And they ended up falling out of school and falling into street life and into crime. And to know that so many of them could be in this world having a great, prosperous life and helping, who knows, helping us live better lives ourselves. If they just had the proper instruction, if they were just properly identified as a dyslexic and given the proper instruction to become better readers, how better could this world be? And definitely how much better could their lives be?
Yeah, and it's important also to highlight that first grade reading levels predict fourth grade and also high school reading levels, right? And so we have to get this right early on.
I think one of the things we point out when we speak to parents through Fathers Read 365, you're not going to find reading teachers after third grade, right? Unless your school brings them private tutoring or they may have taken on this task and make sure reading is being taught after third grade. You're not going to find you learn to read from 0 to 8. You read to learn for the rest of your life. It's basically how it operates here currently. So we have a very small amount of time to make sure our children are on level.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, the percentage of children reading proficiently doesn't change after third grade. In fact, it often goes down a few percentage points. And so the point that, you know, whatever is happening in terms of intervention or special education after third grade is not having the intended impact. So, dyslexia is complex, but in simple terms, if you raise or have or teach a typically developing child who has unusual trouble, so this is the kind of thing that sort of makes you cock your head and go, something doesn't seem right. Reading, writing, or spelling words quickly and accurately, it's possible that they are at risk for or showing signs of dyslexia.
Here's the good news. Risks and signs of dyslexia can be identified as early as pre-K. Don't let them tell you different. We know how to teach reading to children and adults. It is never too late to learn how to read and write. It is so important for us, just like anything else you want to work on, to diagnose it as early as possible. The beauty of that is, I'll give you an example. Today, literally today, my son texted me about an hour ago and said, "Hey, Daddy, I'm going to a drama club practice this afternoon." That's a big thing for us because I told him when I was young, I wanted to be an actor. I thought I could be an actor. But the one thing I was always afraid of is I was going to have to read a script one day. I was going to have to read it out loud in front of people. And I was so scared to do that that I never even tried. I never told anyone I wanted to be an actor because I was scared that I would have to read in front of people. Fast forward to where my son, he's going on his third play. And I never forget, he called me. I was in Vegas that day. And he said, "Daddy, I made it. I got a role." He actually got 4 roles in his first play. And he had to read 4 different parts, and he had to stand up and recite everything in front of the school. And I was so proud of him. He has no idea because he was living a dream that I never got a chance to, solely because we addressed his reading as early as possible, or as
It's such
early
an
as we could. Let me say that
Yeah,
as possible.
yeah. Well, and it's such an important point because not only does it open opportunities academically, but it opens up opportunities for kids to participate in things they couldn't otherwise.
Right, and that's important.
So we will go into more detail on red flags for dyslexia later, but we wanted to mention a couple of things that we noticed with our own children. Um, I noticed that my son had incredible difficulty when he was like, I don't know, 3 or 4, finding the words he wanted to say. He had really, he had a great vocabulary, but he would just get incredibly frustrated because he couldn't kind of pull it's that sort of tip of your tongue word that he wanted to say. He would also mix up entire syllables of words. So, like instead of Pacific Ocean, he might say Pacific Ocean. Brent, what would you add?
I will go back to when I talked about my father when he said, he revealed to me that he believed he lived with dyslexia. And I remember that literally the first thing I thought about was his handwriting. You could not understand anything my dad wrote. And my mom, the running joke in my house was my mom will always say, "Boy, you look like you write, your writing look like chicken scratch." And if you looked at both of our writings, I think anyone who has knowledge of this field the red flag will go off, I would say.
Mm-hmm. It has kind of a specific look to it for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of misinformation out there about dyslexia. So we want to make sure that you are empowered with some facts.
First fact, dyslexia is not a vision problem. It is not seeing and writing letters and words backwards or upside down. I'm going to repeat this because a lot of times people confuse this with this is what dyslexia is. It is not seeing and writing letters and words backwards or upside down. Dyslexia is a difference in how the brain processes language.
So there are all different numbers in terms of how, what percentage of the population dyslexia impacts. A lot of it depends on what cut points researchers use to determine, identifiers for dyslexia. It is estimated to represent 80 to 90% of all students with learning disabilities.
Dyslexia is genetic, but not everyone in the family will develop it. And just to give you a brief view of my birth family, was six of us, four kids, and we all had the same parents, mom and dad. My brother, my two sisters, my mom, straight A students, love to read, perfect handwriting. My father and I, you can understand our handwriting. We hate to read, and we struggle. All same DNA, all with the same children. However, I just I have dyslexia. My brothers and sisters don't. That's very commonplace in families.
So dyslexia is not outgrown. However, with appropriate evidence-based instruction, people with dyslexia can become strong readers and writers and be successful academically.
Risks and signs of dyslexia can be identified as early as pre-K through grade 3 by screening foundational pre-literacy and reading skills, plus family history, plus family/teacher observations.
So 95% of children can become at least average readers if provided evidence-based instruction with well-prepared teachers. So we're going to talk just briefly about how all children learn to read and write.
Learning to speak is natural. Our brains are wired for speech. However, our brains are not wired for reading. Learning to read is not natural. Oftentimes, when I'm speaking or I have spoken, people, you're a great speaker, but when I mention, hey, I may live with this, I did live with dyslexia, people are oftentimes confused when I say that. When they hear me speak, they can hear me use these big words. I grew up with my mom and Johnstone. You're going to learn this Kingsman's English. You're going to learn these words, how to use them in context. So I always present it when speaking very well. Have no problem using words and how they should be used. But if you ask me to identify some of those same words in a paragraph, if you ask me to spell some of those words that I speak, I wouldn't be able to do it. And that may seem confusing to some, but it's the reality to me. Our brains are not wired for reading. Learning to read is not natural. It's an acquired skill. It's a taught skill, excuse me.
Mm-hmm. So I think we can all probably agree that reading comprehension requires us to be able to read the words on the page and also understand the meaning and context of the words being read. So back in 1986, two researchers shared an idea called the simple view of reading. And the idea was not meant to imply that reading is simple, but what they were trying to do is outline the things that have the most impact on reading comprehension. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, we have to be able to read the words on the page. We call that word recognition. And we have to be able to understand the meanings and context of the words. So that's language comprehension. And when those things are intact, we can comprehend what we read, we can integrate information, we can make inferences, and we can communicate about what we've learned. So it's important that I point out that dyslexia is a problem with the word recognition piece of this equation. If a child cannot read the words on the page, let's say that's a 0, it doesn't matter how good their vocabulary or background knowledge is. If that's a 1, they still will not be able to do reading comprehension. They probably have good listening comprehension, but they're not going to have good reading comprehension. So I'm going to give you just a specific example of this. There is a part of our brain that identifies and can manipulate sounds and words, like the sounds in the word cat. We use another part of our brain to connect those sounds to the letters that represent those sounds. So this isn't something that happens naturally. This is something that people have to be taught. Some kids, of course, will pick this up more quickly than others, but everyone benefits from being taught this. If a child has the meaning of the word and understands the context in which it is being used, they can skillfully read the words on the page. Again, dyslexia is really a difficulty with this part of this circuit. So let's just talk a little bit about the meaning of the word dyslexia. Dyslexia comes from the Greek word that means difficulty and the Greek word lexis that means language and words. So dyslexia is a difficulty with language and words. So we're going to share a little bit about signs of dyslexia and red flags at school.
Let's discuss dyslexia. Dyslexia is not related to intelligence, focus, effort, or the amount read to or by a child. It is great to read to your kids. You can increase their knowledge and vocabulary. Reading to your kids is opening your kids' minds, but it is not teaching them to read. Let me go over that one more time. Reading to your kids is opening your kids' minds, but it is not teaching them to read. And we don't want parents to feel that burden of just because I'm reading with my child, I need to be teaching them or they should be learning how to read. No, there's many other benefits of reading with your child, and you should continue to read with your child. However, no, that is not teaching them how to read. Another thing, not allow your experiences with literacy to prevent you from advocating for your child. One of the things that motivated my advocacy for my child was the fact that both my father and I lived with something for many of years. It wasn't even discovered during our school time. And oftentimes a lot of parents who have to advocate or should be advocating for their children, they're undiagnosed dyslexics, right? Or they struggled in school for whatever reason. And that may stop them from feeling the confidence that they can then go advocate for their child. One of the best examples of this, a lady by the name of Grandma at a school that I work for. Grandma let it be known she was from Puerto Rico too, came over here. She didn't know how to read. She did not know how to read. She was a great talker. She could communicate. She brought all the kids from the projects to school every morning, took them home. And Grandma went to one of the children and one of the teachers, and she felt as though the teacher wasn't pushing her child as much as her child could be pushed. And I remember when it was all said and done, I was so proud for Grandma because Grandma wasn't a reader. She wasn't an academician, but she knew that her kids deserved better, and she wouldn't let anyone give them anything less than what she thought was the best. And she didn't allow her not being able to read to stop her from advocating for her children who deserve to learn how to read.
Yeah, and this is just to say, it's hard, but we encourage you, if you feel like something is going on that's not right with your child as relates to reading, trust your instinct. Your instinct is right on, right, Brent?
And I would add to this that it also allows you a chance to be vulnerable not only to your children but even to the school and the people that you're working with. I told them that almost everything they were naming about my son and his ability to read. That's me. I went through that. I understand that. However, I don't want that for him. I let them know that I went through it so hard that I refuse to let him go through it. And I didn't do it in a very confrontational way. I did it pulling at their heartstrings. And I was like, this can't go on any further. My child going through exactly what I'm going through in 2000 and whatever it was at the time. So allow it. I don't want it to make it sound easy, but I would say lead with your heart, right? Lead with your heart and lead with the best that you want for your child. And don't be afraid to say, hey, I'm a struggling reader, or I didn't do well in school. And I refuse to let that happen to my child. The buck stops with you. The buck stops with that school not educating your child and finding out how to get the best resources for them.
So before we talk about signs of dyslexia at different ages, I want to just acknowledge that parents, grandparents, community members, teachers are often concerned about labeling a child in a certain way. And, it's Bren is going to discuss the complexities of this specific to the Black community, but It is if we can't name something, we can't treat it, right? If we don't know that something's called high blood pressure, we can't figure out what the cause is, we don't know what medications or behaviors might be helpful, and we don't know how to tell if what we're doing is working. So it is, it's can be complicated, but we do think it's important to name things. Brent, what else would you add there?
I've literally, Heather, I've said it over 100 meetings with parents over 20 years, screaming, crying, upset, and I understood why. They did not want their babies labeled. And they will walk out of meetings, whatever those meetings were, refusing help, refusing this label, quote unquote label, because they just didn't want their child to have another mark against them, especially something that they could perceive as a negative mark against their name, because that has never been good for the Black community, to have a record of saying something could possibly be negative, right? However, Heather says something very important. And I'll never forget the day I was diagnosed with dyslexia. I was happy. I was so happy. And I tell this to a lot of parents. It was the best day of my life the day I got labeled, because that started the day I started to fight. I started to advocate. I knew what was going on and we could start to address it. I have rights as a person who lives with dyslexia, especially a kid in school. They have rights when their IEP say, hey, this kid, and it may not be dyslexia, but they have these reading difficulties, right? They're showing these reading um, differences. You have a right then that's protected by laws. Why I could sue is because when my son's rights weren't being met, that was a suable offense. I had protection to make sure that my kid could get the best resources. Yes, we don't want our kids labeled as certain things, but labeled as a dyslexic, being tested and found it out that your child have dyslexia, trust me, it is not the end of the world. It's the beginning of a journey that could be so beautiful.
Yeah, and it's all like to your point, it's often a relief for kids. Something that I want to quickly point out is that, just like schools can't diagnose ADHD or autism or the flu, they can't diagnose dyslexia, but they can very much identify risks and signs of dyslexia. In educational language, if a child is tested and found to have what are considered the signs of dyslexia, it will be called a specific learning disability with an impact in reading, or SLD in reading. And so we want parents and teachers to understand that that is synonymous with dyslexia, but the school just can't call it that. However, there's nothing preventing a school from using the word dyslexia, or, telling the parent that that's what this, might look like, so that the parent can actually use the Google machine to get additional information about how to help their child. So I want to just make that
And,
quick.
and Heather,
Mhm.
that's so important because that's what me and my wife did. Um, all the quote unquote signs were there of a dyslexic from the testing, but they couldn't say he was dyslexic. However, at that point, I knew he needed what he needed to address, right? He needed to address his reading and what was best for him at that time. We didn't go through to try to get a diagnosis or to find out. We literally just started addressing it because, like Heather said, we had all the information at our hands, because we were able to have more, people who understood what dyslexia was. We had all the information at our hand to let us know, oh, our child needs help right now. And that's what we did. We got them the proper tutoring services.
Mhm. I often hear teachers say, dyslexia is not recognized in our state. This is a misunderstanding of the law. Dyslexia is recognized in federal law and special education law as one of the categories underneath specific learning disability. So it exists in federal law. Most states at this point have laws that require screening for signs of dyslexia. So again, it's again recognized there. And most states have their departments of education or agencies of education have rules or regulations that refer to the federal language. So it's also important that if someone says to you dyslexia is not recognized, that's actually not accurate. So, just beginning, the things that stand out in my memory from when my son was like 3 to 5, in addition to having trouble retrieving words, is that he had a very hard time learning letter names and sounds. Um, he also had a hard time with things like left and right and ideas like last night and tomorrow. He would always kind of go the today of yesterday. You know, he couldn't quite get that language right.
Right. And Mason, it was the same way. I literally at one point didn't think he was going to be able to get his days of the week down. He would confuse, like you would say, days of the week with months, with
Mm-hmm.
all type. He would throw in just other words, period. And now that I'd have more information on it, I would have been able to pick up like, oh, wow, this could possibly be a sign.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't at the time, but he definitely showed the struggle with concepts of time, mispronouncing or confusing familiar words. There was a joke between the kids in our family that, hey, remember when no one could understand what Mason was saying? Uh, because he
Mm-hmm.
did struggle, and he loved talking, but he struggled with pronouncing words, and these are definitely signs at that age that, again,
Mm-hmm.
not we're not saying that once you see this, oh, your kid has dyslexia, but just signs. It's possible signs.
Mm-hmm. What would you highlight from on this slide in grades K through 3 in terms of reading and spelling that stand out to you?
K-3 under the one would be, and this is where a lot of difficulty you might see as we talk about emotions later on in this presentation. I used to have difficulties putting ideas on paper. I would have these great ideas in my head, right? And I could tell you these great stories about what was going on in my head. But when I had that time to put it on paper, it was like this block. Like I couldn't get it out my head. And it became so frustrating that at times you wouldn't even want to do the work because you knew no matter how excited you were, what was about to happen as soon as you started writing.
It's like what
Another
people
thing I would do,
experience.
and this was a
Sorry.
oh no, go ahead. You
I was
would
just
want
going
to
to say
follow
it's
up on
it,
that point.
it's like what people experienced if they did the simulation. You have all these ideas in your head and you have things you want to write, but you can't get it onto paper.
Right. Another one is skips whole lines of text and mixes up small words. I'll, I'll never, I'll just say this. I will just try to read the top part of a paragraph and the bottom part of a paragraph a lot of times just to try to figure out what's going on. Because in my head, it's going to be too hard to try to figure out that whole paragraph. But if I could figure out the beginning and the end of the paragraph, that might help me understand this paragraph. And it may take me just as long to get that as long as my classmates are reading the whole paragraph. It doesn't work,
Mm-hmm.
but it is something that you try when you're struggling. It's just okay. Let me try to consume the least bit of work, the least amount of reading as possible.
Mm-hmm. And then what about,
Now we
you
want to
know,
talk about.
yeah, sorry.
I just want to say, we want to talk about the emotional behaviors that are usually displayed in grades K1, 2, and 3. Um, you can notice a lot of these behaviors, and I will say one of them was a school avoidance, right? If you have a child that constantly doesn't want to go to school for whatever reason, right? They could be sick one day. They could be, oh, my foot hurts one day. They could be making up a day, oh, we don't have school today. A kid who's constantly want to avoid school is a kid who doesn't want to be there. Because if when you're in school, imagine, again, going through a simulation. Imagine going through that for 8 hours a day for 12, 13 years of your life. There's going to be an emotional toll on you because at some point you have to release a behavior that I identified early was calling myself stupid. I literally believed until the day that I learned that I had dyslexia that there was a part of me that was dumb. because I couldn't read these words like everyone else. I couldn't keep up with learning with everyone else. So a lot of times you start to, put that on yourself. And that went to me calling myself and believing that I was dumb. And that's not a good place for a child to be in first, second, and third grade. That's why when Heather met me, I had a face full of tears because finally that day, I had the opportunity to focus on those 12, 13 years in school and the emotional toll that that had on me. And I'll tell you guys, that's what leads to the depression. That's what leads to the alcoholism is I need a win today. I need to feel good today. I just spent 7 to 8 hours trying to learn and it wasn't working and I gotta go back tomorrow. You start experiencing that as early as kindergarten, first, second, and third grade. So when we see some of these extreme behaviors in these young grades, understand there's a lot of times there's a deeper dive into possible dyslexia.
I remember, Brent, hearing you speak, and this was really at the beginning of, kind of my dyslexia journey with my son. And I came up and I think I said to you, like, I really appreciate you being so vulnerable. Well, I'd love my son to meet you because you could be a hero to him, right? Because you have, articulated um, exactly kind of what he's been going through.
And oftentimes that you don't realize how much that meant to me that day, especially the state I was in. I was crying. I felt like, what did I just do? Talking in front of all these people, whatever. But when you said that, it made me feel good because so often in school, we're not celebrated for our intelligence. We're not picked at. I never got an award in school, any graduations, any honor rolls, any of that stuff. I was there. I was a class clown, right? But to hear that I could be someone's hero speaking of speaking on something that's educating people was like oh my wow, like that's one of the few times in my life, and I was 40 something years old at the time that I heard someone praise me for my intelligence.
And that's when I wrapped my arms around his ankles and said, whatever you do going forward, I want to be involved in it. Because I knew he was on to great things, which has proven true.
And here we
So
are.
here we are. So, um, in short, the only strategy that children should be taught to use to read the words on the page are the letters on the page. Again, like Brent said earlier, I'm going to say that again. The only strategy children should use to read the words on the page are the letters on the page. These are some instructional red flags that are practices that are not aligned with how we know the brain develops skilled reading. If you hear reading is natural, struggling readers magically blossom, they just need to read more. Are you sure you read to them at home? Or, very importantly, if you see this tool with eagle eye and lips the fish and stretchy the snake, lippy the dolphin, these are all things which some teachers have learned, which again are not aligned with research, not teachers' fault. Um, you know, this is not aligned with how the brain learns to read. In fact, if a child is reading, or you can even think about if you're reading and you don't, you can't read a word and you have to look at a picture and then come back to the sentence, your reading comprehension is interrupted. It tells you to flip the vowel. Kind of all of these things take your cognitive effort away from reading and understanding the words on the page to doing something which is absolutely not reading the words on the page. So if you see these things, it is appropriate to say, it is my understanding that this does not support how the brain learns to read. Could you please show me some data that some assessment data, some testing data that tell you exactly what things my kid is missing and what you are doing to kind of fill those gaps.
Yes. Risk factors for dyslexia: family history of reading difficulties, below benchmarks on foundational reading skills, family teacher observations. Real quick, I like to speak on the second one, below benchmarks or foundational reading skills. A lot of times as parents, or yeah, I'll just say as parents, we'll get back some reading scores, right? And it'll say our child isn't proficient or that our child is proficient, right? But for a parent who receives a score and they say, here's the score, your kid isn't proficient, at that moment, your advocacy should begin. Don't just take that score and say, okay, and move on. At that point, if you learn that your kid isn't on level, isn't proficient, start asking questions, right? Start asking questions around how are we getting to proficiency? Is there a plan in place to make sure that they get there? And also, as a parent, you may start to look for some Wilson's possibly tutoring services, some OG possibly tutoring services, some tutoring services that can help your kid become on level or proficient. Don't just get those scores when you go to report card night or they come home with your kids that say that your child is not on level or isn't proficient and allow that just to sit on the dresser. At that very moment, the advocacy for your child should begin, at least at the minimum, with a meeting with their teacher to understand what's going on, what's the plan, and are there things in place in school that could help a struggling reader.
That's such important emphasis, Brent. I remember getting these, so there's when they do screening at the beginning of the year, or throughout the year if they do it throughout the year. And I remember I would get these reports that showed that my son was kind of in the red on all these different, subtests of the reports. And I would be told, well, that's just because we haven't sort of taught those things yet. So that's not what benchmark, or screening tools are used for. Those scores, like benchmark screening assessments, are measuring where your kid should be at that point in the year, right? And so there was just a general misunderstanding of what the assessments were actually supposed to be telling you. So again, if you, to Brent's point, if you get these scores back and they are below where they should be, it's important to start asking questions. So now we just want to talk about what do I do if I think my child or student may have dyslexia? I'm going to turn this over to
Here,
Brent because as we were preparing for this, he had a really good thing he said.
yes, first thing I'll say, the moment that you learn that your kid has dyslexia, or even is a struggling reader, right, we'll say, embrace the journey. Don't panic. And what do I mean about embrace the journey? There is going to be a journey. If you want your kid to go from a struggling reader to a proficient reader, you're going to have to advocate for them. There's going to be some tough times. However, to go through that and to go through it with them and to go through it with their educators, I would say it's an amazing journey. It impacts so many people along the way, especially if you can find a good team of people to support you through it. And again, don't panic. This is one thing that your child is living with out of many things. Here on this port are some advocacy support agency organizations, excuse me. Again, these are some advocacy support organizations. There's some podcasts that we have listed here: Black and Dyslexic, Science of Reading. You can find some background information. We have some information here from Middle Tennessee State University. We also have some advocacy and support groups. And I will say, just for my better knowledge of dyslexia as a parent, but also as support as a person who lives with dyslexia, I just started reaching out to support groups on social media, specifically on Facebook at the time. And I found about three or four of them. And I just got lost in them some days, just in rabbit holes, learning more, seeing how different people were advocating at their schools for their children. And I think it was just a good place to feel normal, a good place to feel like you have some allies that's going through what you're going through. So please take your time on this page and find what best works for you. Those podcasts are good to hear just because there's so many different stories and professionals speaking to dyslexia that you can listen to on your way to work or as you're cooking. But guys, please immerse yourself in the world of dyslexia because that's part of embracing the journey, and it allows you not to panic. It allows you to deal from a space of research and education and love, really.
Some podcast that I didn't have space to put on here is a series called "Sold a Story" by an American public media investigative journalist named Emily Hanford. So again, it's called "Sold a Story" by Emily Hanford. It does address dyslexia, but it also addresses the ways in which reading in general is not being taught in ways that are aligned with research. So that's another good one. Really importantly, and the reason that we're able to present to you today is that the VCU School of Education has an annual dyslexia symposium that is supported by the Ruth Harris Professorship. Anything you will have access to this slide deck and anything on this page. If you click on it, it will take you directly to the resource. Keep your eyes open for information on again, the VCU School of Education Dyslexia Symposium. So this again is a place where there's some misinformation kind of out there. So we just want to make sure that you understand what these terms mean. Structured literacy and the Orton-Gillingham method of teaching or tutoring are principles of instruction. So there are programs that are based on, they're structured literacy based or Orton-Gillingham based, like Wilson that Brent mentioned his son did. But these are principles of instruction. Even if a company uses the name Orton-Gillingham in its name, again, there are programs that are based on this, but the instruction is explicit, it's systematic, so it builds on things. It's data driven, so we use assessment data to understand where the gaps are. And we give kids enough practice to make sure that they master these specific skills related to reading the words on the page. If you are able to find a tutor, or if you're able to hire a tutor to do, Orton-Gillingham or structured literacy tutoring, it's helpful if they've done not only some training, but also a practicum. So the practicum is where they will have had to submit videos of themselves teaching kids for feedback from other very experienced practitioners. The reason I say this is that the training can be anywhere from 3 days to 6 months, right? And so you really want to know that someone has not only had training, but has gotten feedback on their tutoring. To find a tutor, you can certainly look at the Orton-Gillingham Academy of Practitioners, but I would just remind you that on this previous page, many of these organizations are also connected to tutors that they could recommend to you. So hopefully you have taken away that, if you notice something with a struggling student, it's okay to say something. Brent, what would you add to that?
I would say it's please say something, right? Not only to the parent, to the child. I talk often about I found my third, fourth, and fifth grade report cards. And on there, they all did say Brennan's struggling. He needs some help. And that's all it would say, that he needs some help. He is struggling with reading. This was the 80s, so no one at the time, I guess, knew what to tell my mom or dad, what to do, how to help me. But the one thing I always felt like those teachers could have said something to me. No teacher ever recognized my reading difficulty, not personally. They always wrote it on, report cards. They saw my testing, but none of them ever said, "Hey, Brent, I understand you're struggling. Can I help you with something?" Or to my mom or anything. No one even recognized. I felt like I was in this world by myself because no one even acknowledged that I was sitting there struggling. And maybe those teachers couldn't do anything for me, but they sure could have said, "I understand this is tough," because it was tough. It was really tough. It was very hard. So if you see something, say something. If you look at this video and you see a parent that's struggling with a kid that's struggling with reading, say, "Hey, check out this video. They have some tips that could possibly help little whoever it is," right? That's what we're talking about. And teachers, if it's just say, "Hey," invite them to lunch one day and say, "I understand. I see your scores. I see what's going on, and I'm just here for you. I understand what's going on." Say something. Say something. Try to advocate. And parents, again, if your kid is drowning, this is the best way you could throw them a life raft. If they're drowning in their literacy journey, this is the life raft. This is the help. Advocate for them. Say, "I understand, baby, and we're going to figure this out." Even again, if you struggle with it, we have to say something, and then we have to, more importantly, we have to do something. We totally believe that this is an all hands on deck, right? Speaking, piggybacking from what we just talked about, we believe we have to have this holistic approach to reading, right? Everyone in the community benefits from children, from people who know how to read. Therefore, everyone in the community should play a part in making sure that our children know how to read. Because when we do, we have safer communities. We have more prosperous communities. This isn't a us versus them thing, right? This can't be a parent alone in a fight. This can't be children in a fight by themselves trying to advocate for themselves. This can't be teachers saying, oh, she's not reading to her kids, or he's not reading to his kids. No, it has to be we, right? Has to go from us, them to this is our why. This is how we're going to make it better for the children in our community. This is all hands on deck, leading with love, with the approach that we're going to make sure that our babies know how to read. And if we have to identify dyslexia and then have to identify dyslexia, then properly treat dyslexia and make sure that our babies are thriving even though they have dyslexia, that's what we have to do. Not a us, not a them, but a we.
I love that. That was so well said, Brent. So we really appreciate you allowing us to spend some time with you today. You are welcome to reach out to us. Again, you can reach out to the advocacy support organizations that we mentioned, but you can also reach out to us. Like, you will have access to the slide deck, and I just want to again show you that the references that were also included. We hope you have a fabulous rest of your day and that this has been helpful to you.
Thank you.